Hi there. I'm going to talk about how to start improvising by thinking in new ways about what notes to use when you're improvising. So let me show you what I mean. If you are playing a C chord and want to make up or improvise something to go with that C chord, there are 3 easy ways you can get started with making things up that would go well with that C chord. First of all, I'm going to show you a C chord, which is made out of notes C, E, and G, notes 1, 3, and 5 of the C scale. When you see a chord name that says C7, it means you have a C chord with, instead of the regular 7 from the scale added to it, that 7 is flatted a half a step. It's called a dominant 7. So a C7 chord would be the C chord with the 7th added on top. Okay, so if we are going to improvise to a C7 chord, here are 3 easy ways to start doing that. A big part of improvising is learning how to switch your thinking from sight-reading thinking, where you're thinking very specific notes all the time, to thinking more general neighborhood notes and general frameworks of movement. So I'll show you what I mean. Again, with that C7 chord that I just showed you earlier, there are 3 ways we can move around sets of notes that will work with that. So the first way would be, with that C7 chord, to use the notes of the C scale with the 7th note flatted to match the top note of the C7 chord, that flat 7th note, and then the C on top to finish it off. So this is the first set of tools for starting to improvise with a C7 chord. You'd use any of the notes of the C scale to start making things up with. So if you know that this is your improvisation neighborhood, you don't necessarily need to think about, oh, I'm going to play this note and then that note and then that note. All you have to think is, I'm going to move around the neighborhood. I just made something up using the notes of the C scale with a flatted 7th added so it matches the C7 chord. And it sounded pretty cool. I wasn't thinking specific notes. I was just moving around the neighborhood. So that's one of the first ways to begin improvising using a specific palette of tools. So that's using the scale. Another way that's even easier is to take the actual notes of the chord that you're playing. So again, we've got these 3 notes of the C chord, the C, E, and G, and then adding the B flat note on top. And use those 4 notes as your palette of improvisation tools. So you could just use any of those 4 notes to make up improvisations with. And of course, you could go the next octave up or anywhere else on the keyboard using those 4 notes of the chord. And again, I wasn't thinking specific notes in particular, like note names and note values. I was just thinking, I'm moving around the neighborhood of these 4 notes as my improv palette. I could use a couple of notes at a time or wiggle around between a couple of notes. So it's kind of going from a more specific way of thinking on a piano to more general thinking. I'm moving around the neighborhood. So we talked about how to use the C scale as your neighborhood improv palette and how to use the actual 4 notes of the C7 chord as your improv palette. The third way is to use a blues scale. So if you're using a C7 chord, the corresponding blues scale that goes with that would be a C blues scale. It has many of the notes of the C7 chord with a couple of alterations and a couple passing tones. So the C blues scale has been covered in other videos of mine, so I'm not going to go into it in detail, but just to show you that it's another way you can have a set of specific notes, but you can move around them more generally. So as I'm playing this, I'm not thinking, I'm playing an E flat, and now I'm playing an F, and now I'm playing a G. What I'm thinking of is, hey, these are the notes of my improvisation neighborhood, and I'm just going to move around. Gonna move up, gonna move down, gonna move up. some more. Maybe wiggle around a few of them, a couple notes together, several of them wiggling together. Ta-da! So there you go. Those are 3 ways to begin improvising by thinking of a particular palette or group of chords that go with a specific chord. So again, just to recap, our C7 chord, you could begin improvising by using notes of the C scale. Just flat that 7th to match the 7 in the chord. And then just move around the neighborhood of those 7 notes. The second way is to move around the neighborhood of the 4 notes that make up the C7 chord. And again, kind of just thinking I'm moving around these 4 notes as opposed to thinking, now I'm going to play the E, now I'm going to play the G. And the third way is to use the notes of the blues scale that starts on the same note as the chord. And again, thinking this is my neighborhood, these notes of the blues scale. And those are 3 ways that you can begin to improvise or make things up by thinking more generally of neighborhood notes and tool palettes rather than thinking specific notes at a time. This is one way that you can begin to practice your improvisation skills. There are lots more techniques and tools. These are just a few beginning ones. But this is a good way to start thinking more generally about sets of notes that are like a neighborhood, and you're just moving around the neighborhood to make things up. It's kind of fun, takes the pressure off, and it helps your playing become more relaxed. So have fun improvising, and I'll see you around the musical neighborhood.